Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open final highlights. Alcaraz clinches title after world number 1 retires hurt. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final highlights. Carlos Alcaraz lifted the Cincinnati title after world number 1 Jannik Sinner retired hurt in the first set of the big finale, trailing 0-5 in the first game. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final highlights. Carlos Alcaraz was crowned Cincinnati champion after world number 1 Jannik Sinner was forced to retire hurt, trailing 0-5 during the opening set of the final, handing the Spaniard his maiden title at the tournament and a 6th trophy of the 2025 season. The top two in the ADP rankings, number 1 Sinner and number 2 Alcaraz, have been in commanding form in Ohio. The Italian, last year's champion, has yet to drop a set en route to his 8th Masters 1000 final. He is riding a 26-match winning streak on hard courts, a run that includes titles at the 2023 Shanghai Masters, the ADP World Tour Finals, and the 2024 Australian Open. His last defeat in a hard-court final came in Beijing last October, when Alcaraz stormed back from a set down to prevail in 3 and deny the reigning U.S. Open winner. Alcaraz, meanwhile, had a more testing road to the Cincinnati final, dropping 2 sets along the way. Yet, he has still advanced to his 7th consecutive tour-level final and his 2nd in Cincinnati, following his runner-up finish to Novak Djokovic in their classic 2023 showdown. The rivalry between the two adds an extra layer of intrigue. Alcaraz leads their head-to-head 8-5, including 5 straight victories earlier this year in Rome and at the French Open. But after letting 3 championship points slip in Paris, Sinner struck back at Wimbledon, where he ended Alcaraz's streak with a 4-set triumph to capture his maiden title at SW19. Beyond Sunday's trophy, there is much more at stake. The result could decide who carries the number 1 ranking into the U.S. Open later this month. Sinner currently holds a 2,250-point lead, but last year's U.S. Open results distort the picture. Sinner lifted the trophy while Alcaraz crashed out in the second round, giving the Italian a hefty 1,950-point edge from New York alone. Alcaraz could trim the gap to 1,900 points. Once last year's U.S. Open points drop, he would actually overtake Sinner by 50. But should Sinner defend his Cincinnati title, the swing would be 700 points in his favor, giving him a 650-point cushion. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final live. Alcaraz expresses sympathy with Sinner. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final live. Alcaraz expressed sympathy with Sinner, who gave no indication of the exact nature of his illness. "I'm pretty sure that from these situations you're going to come back better, even stronger than you always do. That's what true champions do," Alcaraz said. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final live. Sinner apologizes. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Hello everyone. First, usually I start with the opponent, but today I have to start with you guys. I'm super sorry to disappoint you from yesterday. I didn't feel great. I thought that I would improve during the night, but it came up worse, so I tried to come out, trying to make it at least a small match, but I couldn't handle more. I'm very sorry for all of you. I know that maybe some of you on Monday, they had to work, they had to do something else, so I'm really sorry. Jannik Sinner apologized to fans at Cincinnati after getting retired out in the final. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Sorry Jannik. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Carlos Alcaraz went up to Jannik Sinner to console him after the final. He also wrote, "Sorry Jannik," on the camera to show his respect towards him. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Alcaraz crowned champion after Sinner retires hurt. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Jannik Sinner couldn't complete the match and decided to retire from the final as Carlos Alcaraz is the champion of the Cincinnati Open men's singles title. The Spaniard was dominant with 5-0 lead in the first set, but unfortunately Sinner couldn't continue. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Alcaraz dominates, 5-0 up. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. A complete domination from Carlos Alcaraz here, as he has claimed a 5-0 lead in the first set. Jannik Sinner is looking clueless and in a spot of bother about how to bounce back in the game. Meanwhile, Alcaraz is calm despite a scintillating start. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Alcaraz 4-0 up in first set. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. A dominant show from Carlos Alcaraz as he has silenced Jannik Sinner's corner by claiming a 4-0 lead in the first set. A dream start for the Spaniard as Sinner looked no match for him so far in the big clash. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Alcaraz on fire. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Jannik Sinner is under immense pressure here after being 0-3 down in the first set. It's going the Spaniard's way in the first set at the moment, and the world number one has to rework his plans to bounce back. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Alcaraz 2-0 up in first set. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Another point in Carlos Alcaraz's favor. This time Sinner did put up a solid fight. However, there is no stopping the Spaniard here as he is looking silky smooth here, unfazed by the challenge put up by the world number one. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Alcaraz takes first point. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Carlos Alcaraz claims the first point quite comfortably here and puts early pressure on Jannik Sinner. Smooth start from the Spaniard as he claims an early point here to take advantage in the first set. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Jannik Sinner with the serve. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Jannik Sinner with the serve, and it's the fault to start the big finale. Carlos Alcaraz with the advantage here early in the clash. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. The finalists arrive at the court. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner have entered the middle and are warming up for the mega clash here at the P&G Center Court. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. TikTok, TikTok. Jannik Sinner vs. Carlos Alcaraz, Cincinnati Open 2025 final live score. We are only a few minutes away from the blockbuster clash where Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz will script another chapter in their fierce rivalry. Hey friends, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like. Got a question, opinion, or suggestion? Drop a comment below. I read all of them and I often feature interesting ones in my next videos. And most importantly, for more exclusive boxing highlights and celebrity news, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us grow and keep bringing you awesome content. See you in the next video. Stay safe and take care.